Okay, so here we are looking at really actually only five different levels of ecological organization, but there's a sixth that's kind of hidden in here, and the next couple slides in this lecture will talk about it in a little bit more depth. But let's look at the five that we have in front of us on this slide here. We'll start at the smaller level, and we'll work our way up to the larger levels of ecologic organization as we just progress through this slide here. So starting at the first level, we have it's called an organism. And an organism, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, is defined as just one living being. And we'll get into what living means a little bit later, but there is one organism, one individual living creature. And as you can see kind of down here underneath the organism label is basically the two primary objectives of any individual organism, and they are to survive and to survive long enough to reproduce. Okay? So if we move our way up to the next level of ecological organization, we're dealing with something called a population. And undoubtedly you've heard the term population thrown around when we talk about the human population or the population of Denver, the population of Cherry Creek High School. Well, here we're talking about the population of living organisms, and simply we have multiple organisms all belonging to the same species living in close proximity to each other. So we've basically just magnified from one organism to multiple, but they happen to all belong to the same species and they live in close proximity to one another. That is a population. Now, when we come up to the next level of community, again, a term that you likely have heard used in several different contexts. Here we're talking about ecology. Ecological community is defined, as you can see down here once again, as interaction among different populations. Okay, so not only do we have one species here, like this prairie dog, but maybe not super easy to tell. Back there is an owl, and here's some other type of predatory bird. And way back on the plains, we have some type of grazing mammal, some buffalo or something like that. So here we have multiple different populations, but they're all, once again, kind of in close proximity to each other. So we have an interaction among populations. Go up one step further and we are now in an ecosystem. Now, one very unique thing happens in an ecosystem to set it apart from a community. Not only do we have our prairie dogs, and here's a butterfly, and here's an owl, and there's those grazers back there, and here's our predatory bird. So we have several different species all living in the same area. Those are living organisms. Let's not forget, the plant that we have growing right here and little grasses that we have growing back here. Those are all living organisms, okay? Those are all defined as what we would call biotic factors in this ecosystem. Biotic, the root word or the prefix there, bio, meaning life, those are living factors in this ecosystem. What an ecosystem has that a community does not then is non-living components. So you can see what we've added to this picture, something like a storm cloud, precipitation coming down from that storm cloud. Here we have, looks like a wildfire, but we have gases rising up into the atmosphere. So we have non-living components as well. Those are referred to as abiotic factors. So we have our living or our biotic components and our non-living or our abiotic components. That's what makes up an ecosystem. Okay. Now, right in between these two is where we're missing one of the levels of organization that you need to know. It's called a biome, and we'll talk a little bit more about biomes in the next few slides. We'll just graduate finally to the biosphere, and the biosphere, as you can see, global processes, but we're talking about anywhere on Earth. That's land, that's water, or that's up here in the clouds, the atmosphere. Anywhere on Earth that supports life is considered the biosphere, the living sphere that makes up our planet. Now here is that missing level of ecological organization known as a biome, and there are several different, let's just try to write this up here real quick. There are several different biomes that stretch across our entire globe. A biome is defined as an ecosystem with similar both biotic and abiotic factors, but stretched across a very large expanse of land or water, I suppose. Okay, so here you can see down here we just kind of have a key that shows us different types of biomes that exist across planet Earth. And if you look at one that's kind of close to home, you know, with Colorado being kind of, we'll call it that region right around there. It looks like we have some coniferous forest in Colorado. It looks like we have a streak of maybe some tundra, probably not, some chaparral coming down the Rocky Mountains there. And even getting into some temperate grasslands, obviously out kind of in the eastern plains. Here we have some grasslands. So notice it's not just confined to that area of Colorado, though. These, stretches, these biomes go across huge expanses of land all the way up into Canada. These grasslands, again, the entire Midwestern part of the United States, and we can see them not only in North America, but in other places around the globe as well. So where we see these grasslands, occupying the Midwest portion of North America, we see something similar occupying a very large chunk of Europe and Asia. So these biomes stretch long distances across the entire planet. Another important thing to notice here is how these biomes are related to what we call the latitude that they're located at. And latitude, here are all markers of latitude. Here we have the equator, which is considered 0 degrees latitude, but then 30 degrees north, and down here 30 degrees south, and we go 60 degrees north of the equator, 60 degrees south of the equator. Those markers that show us the latitude we're at on our planet have a pretty significant role in determining the type of biome that can be found around that region on planet Earth. So notice anywhere between the equator and 30 degrees north and the equator and 30 degrees south, we have a lot of, say, like this dark green area. If you look down here, tropical forests. Okay. Again, there's a tropical region between 0 and the 30s. Here's a tropical region. Here's tropics. There's tropics. But they're all between that 0 and 30 degrees north or 0 and 30 degrees south. Okay, so that area between the 30s on planet Earth is referred to as the tropics. So when you talk about going on a tropical vacation, you're talking usually about somewhere in Mexico or maybe somewhere in the Caribbean down here. They're considered tropical because they're in the tropics. They're between 30 degrees south and 30 degrees north. Okay. As we get outside of the tropics, as we get below 30 degrees south, or as we get up here above 30 degrees north, now we're getting into what we call more temperate areas. Okay, and you see this term right here. We've already highlighted before, but temperate grassland, or you'll see down here temperate deciduous forest. Okay, so this orange color you can see is primarily outside of 30 degrees, above 30 degrees. Okay, again over here, this section of grasslands, primarily above 30 degrees. It's considered temperate. Okay. If we look at this light green color, temperate deciduous forest, again, here's the eastern part of the United States, but most of that is above 30 degrees north. Okay. Pretty much all of Europe, or a huge stretch of Europe going on into Asia, is temperate deciduous forest. But look at that's above 30 degrees north. So the term tropical will refer to between the two 30-degree markers, whereas the term temperate is going to refer to outside, either below 30 degrees or above 30 degrees, outside of those 30-degree latitude markers. Sticking with the topic of biomes here, you're going to have to know how to do something or read something called a climatogram. Okay, and a climatogram focuses on the climate of various biomes. And climate, typically, we look at two kind of primary factors to determine a climate. We look at precipitation and we look at temperature. And we look at that over long periods of time. And in this case, we're looking over the course of a year. Okay, so what you'll see is kind of an interesting looking graph, a graph that combines two different things. It's part bar graph, part line graph. The bars here are representing precipitation levels starting in January and ending in December. So there's our 12 months of the year. Okay, so those bars are representing precipitation, whereas this line is representing the temperature that is present in those months. Okay, so what we can notice here is these climatograms have some patterns. Okay, first of all, look at where most of them are pointing. Don't be fooled by where the graph itself is. They have these lines that kind of show where they're actually pointing to. So if we look at where all of these climatograms are highlighting, They are areas, for the most part, I guess, because I found a few that are outside of this. But here's 0 degrees. Here's the equator. Okay. Here's 20, here's 40, so here's about 30, and here's about 30 down here. Notice we are in a tropical region. Most of these are taking place between 30 degrees south and up here 30 degrees north. Okay, so these are tropical biomes. And if you're looking for any type of pattern to make sense of these types of biomes, you'll notice that, for example, all of these tropical biomes here, 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 and here, which are in the northern hemisphere, they are north of the equator. Look at their rainfall. Their rainfall is highest mostly in the summer, in the middle parts of the year. Okay. Contrast that though for a second. When we get to these regions down here that are below the equator, they're still tropical, but they're below the equator, we have kind of the opposite graph when it comes to rainfall. Okay. Their rainfall actually dips lowest in the summertime. They don't experience much precipitation at all in the summertime. Okay. On the flip side, and you kind of have to ignore these lines here for a second, or maybe let me just switch colors here, sorry. Oops. There we go. On the flip side, if we're going to concentrate right here on the actual temperature, first of all, notice that these lines are relatively flat, relatively. Okay, the reason they are relatively flat is because at that middle part of our planet, right around the equator, these areas of the planet receive fairly constant sunlight all year long, so their temperature is going to be pretty constant. Okay. However, what you do notice is, again, just like in the precipitation, we see, man, this is going to be a little tough with all these lines, but we see kind of a spike in temperature in these northern regions. Okay. This one, which is very, very close to the actual equator itself, has a very flat line. Okay. But then when we get down into the southern, again, these regions down here in the southern hemisphere, we actually see a little bit of a dip in the summertime, because guess what? The southern hemisphere, what we consider our summer in the northern hemisphere, is actually their winter. So they have their cooler temperatures during that time of year, when we are experiencing more of our warmer temperatures. Okay, so again, this is called a climatogram. It shows the precipitation levels as a bar graph. It shows the temperature as a line graph together on the same image and stretching across an entire year.